So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This Lunch and Learn is an opportunity for us to come together to explore just a little bit about what our Women Build consists of this year at DuPage Habitat. So, Women Build is DuPage Habitat for Humanity's signature fundraising event, and it takes our mission of affordable housing and merges it with affordable homeownership, home repair, and neighborhood reinvestment for low and limited income families with our belief that women are powerful and essential to building up our communities. This is an event where women come together to build homes and hope for other female-led households. And at DuPage Habitat, we very deeply align with our 4 pillars of Women Build, which are equity, empowerment, impact, and community. This year's theme specifically is embracing and advancing equity, in which we took a very focused look at women in wealth, the wage gap, and how a lack of resources and opportunity creates very unfair wealth distribution. As a note to get everyone paying attention, did you know that women make roughly 82 cents to a man's dollar? And did you know that with every intersection, like race and disability, that number actually dissipates? It will take us hundreds of years to close that gap. So if I have everyone's attention now, this is why we've brought in some experts to talk to you about self-advocacy and being your own champion in the workplace and beyond. So we are thrilled to be chatting alongside 2 members of the Band of Sisters, Angelique and Mitzi. And the Band of Sisters are a group of executive level women who have seen it all and have made it their mission to fight unconscious gender bias in the workplace. Before I pass it over to Angelique and Mitzi, please note that you can message me, Amanda, directly with any questions, and we will make sure to get those answered at the end. So from there, I will let the Band of Sisters take it away. Tell us a little bit about who you are as a group, individually, and a little bit about your book, You Should Smile More.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm Angelique Velmer-Krems, one of the 6 Band of Sisters, and the 6 of us all met at PepsiCo. So that's where we worked, and we worked anywhere from the late 80s to 2016. And we overlapped together for about a decade. And it was a great place to work. We made, obviously, lifelong friends. And we actually went on to 29 different industries, I think we counted, and many years of experience. But we reunited a few years ago, and we were exchanging stories about what it was like to be a woman in the workplace. And yada, 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 we ended up writing a book. And the book is, as you said, called You Should Smile More, How to Dismantle Gender Bias in the Workplace. And you've got the 2 best sisters with you today. Myself, I was in marketing for 23 years at PepsiCo, a few years at News Corp, and then at BlackRock. And now I'm an advisor to startups and emerging brands, working with a variety of VC and PE-backed companies. And a new board director. And that's me. I'll pass it over to Mitzi.
Thanks, Angelique.
Good morning, everyone. Mitzi Short. I was probably one of the longest tenure with PepsiCo. After PepsiCo, I spent 25 years in PepsiCo in a number of sales, marketing, and operations roles. Since then, I have had my own private practice of executive coaching and consulting, working with the C-suite and mid and senior level managers and leaders. I also have run a franchise business for golf instruction. So excited to be here today.
Thanks, Mitzi. Well, we're going to just jump right into it because I know we have a lot to cover. So first off, why Women Build? Why was this a good partnership for you all based on our 4 pillars of equity, empowerment, community, and impact?
Well, I'll start out by saying it's funny that those are the 4 words that we talk about all the time. So it frames everything that we do, because the point about equity is core to our thesis. And if you think about equity as the what, and empowerment of women as the what, community impact are a little bit the how. because we believe in bringing people together, the community of women, but not just women, because part of our thesis is that women shouldn't solve this on their own. So a big part of what we try to talk about is how do we call men into the conversation and talk to leaders and talk to witnesses who could help advocate. And impact at the end of the day is the most important thing. Like we're obsessed with how else can we have impact and move this conversation forward.
Excellent. Love that. Mitzi?
Yeah, and I'd say in the book, we actually talk about, if you look at all the chapters, in some way, shape, or form, talks about how to increase your impact, how to feel more empowered, how to leverage a sense of community or the community that you have, both as the individual leader in the organization, both as a boss, whether you're male or female, or whether you're a witness, right? Be it male or female. So that's a huge community that we're hoping to join collectively to really help us dismantle gender bias. And empowerment is really important, right? What it is and how you do it. And us, the sisters, sharing stories about how to do that so that people can see themselves in the stories and figure out which of those might apply best to their situation. And equity is why we have the conversation, because things aren't equal and they're not equitable. So how do we bring that about in our lifetimes, hopefully, right? So, and I think in the short term, it's really all about how do you have tools so that women can help themselves and women can help women. And then longer term, obviously, how do you bring in allies to help support that?
Yeah. Can I dig a little bit into that just off the bat when we talk about allies? Before, just to preface the conversation we're having here, men are a big part of this conversation. Can you both kind of shed a little bit of light of some high level basics of how men play a role in an equitable workplace, and then a little bit in the self-advocacy space for women as well?
I'll start out. And I'll say this was an epiphany very early in our speaking tour on the book. The first audience that we spoke to was actually at PepsiCo, so they welcomed us back. The book hadn't even come out yet, but we presented our thesis to a room full of women leaders. So there were like 150 women in sales, and it was a conference that was bringing them together for their development. And there was one man in the room, and he was a senior executive who was a sales leader sponsoring the event. And he listened to what we were talking about in our thesis of the little things that add up to culture that don't get talked about enough. And the women, of course, were feeling very seen, very validated. Like there's a lot of like, oh, this is great, this is helpful that you're talking about this. And this one man in the room said to us afterwards, I wish all of my male leaders had heard this. And that was the light bulb for us that we're like, we need to get to the men, because there's so many well-intentioned men that really want to do the right thing. They want to see the diversity of thought that comes with having a workplace with many women throughout the organization and in leadership. But they need help, and they they really appreciate, I think, the inviting tone. Like it's not a blame game, it's not a negative thing, it's not a scolding, so we really try to make our tone very inclusive.
Yeah, that's it. Early on, when we were having our conversations around the table, talking about our experiences and how we would really like to give back and go have conversations in organizations, we were wondering, wow, we're experiencing this, but did other women experience it? But we also wondered, what was the situation like for men? So I know I talked to a lot of millennial men at the same time I was talking to women to figure out, how they saw themselves as allies and what information would be helpful to them. And so it's a relevant topic for millennials, people that are young in their careers, also more tenured in their careers. And to the degree that we can energize a multitude of allies to help us dismantle gender bias, the better off we'll all be.
Awesome. I like that word, energize. We're going to use that. So kind of the next question is, why is empowering women important in our current world and our workplaces?
Yeah, so I think well, my experience has been as a leader coming up at multiple landing points in my career, whether I was leading a small team of 5 or 6 people or a whole unit of 400 people. Um, Helping people help themselves is really key, and how to give them the motivation, the inspiration to do that, but importantly, the tools. And I often talk about what are the tools you have in your toolkit. And I say I've been officially coaching for over 30 years and in my executive coach capacity for the last 10 years. And it really is, how do you help people help themselves? Oftentimes you hear it in terms of helping people fish instead of fishing for them, so to speak. But that, to me, that's what it's all about. So we leverage our book to share our stories again, so that people can see, if you're in this situation, how might you react, or actually respond versus react is what I would rather say, right? So providing tools so people can see from other people's experiences what might work for them, so that they can have more impact or better outcome than they would have had otherwise.
Yeah, and I think it's always so interesting to reflect backwards, when you've had a 30-year career, but it's really clear in hindsight that the workplace was not built for women. It was built for men. And that's just how, things started. And so there's so many things that need to evolve. And I think it's sort of obvious, but that's why it's unconscious bias. Like, it's not a conscious thing. It's not like people are trying to hold women back, but it wasn't built for women. And so all these like nuances and aspects that you wouldn't think of have to be brought into the consciousness so that they can change and evolve. And so many of actually, if you see in our book, every chapter is a different little thing. And one of the things that we liked to do was bring in the research, because we didn't have to do quantitative research on why these things matter, because it's already been done. So we just had to bring in that research and say, here's why any of these things matters. And then our job was to say what to do about it, and what to do if you're a woman, what to do if you're a leader, what to do if you're a witness. Because there's so much evidence that if you pay attention to these things, you can actually change the workplace for the better. But it has to be conscious.
Absolutely. Mitzi, you said that you want to help people help themselves. And so at Habitat, we have a saying that it's a hand up, not a hand out, because we're really dedicated to partnership. And how do we do this together in community? So I really loved that point. So looking at self-promotion, I think that can be defined in many different ways depending on the environment. So how would you both describe self-promotion? And then we're going to go into a couple of the nitty-gritty pieces of what that means.
This is a key topic, self-promotion. And there's actually a few chapters, but one in particular from our book we call Be Like Bill. And the reason is because, like, the subtitle is How Men Take Their Self-Worth All the Way to the Bank. But the research is really interesting here on self-promotion. And it says that women are more likely to screen themselves out, to think that they're not ready, or they don't deserve, or they need more qualifications to go for a job or a raise or a promotion or a stretch assignment. And the LinkedIn study was actually that women apply to 20% fewer jobs than men, because they think that the job description is a requirement and they have to have all of them, whereas men think 60% is good enough. And the interesting thing is that women are not paranoid. They actually get less credit for their potential than men do. So with all this research put together, we go back to, so what do you do about it? Like, the first thing starts with awareness and understanding that this is a thing. Like, if you're a woman, you need to check yourself on the need for self-promotion, like and how it helps you advance. And if you're a leader, thinking about women on your team and how they're going to be approaching any opportunity.
That's great.
Yeah, I'd say in its simplest form, it's advocating for yourself. And it sounds so simple, but it's something that as women, if there's a generalization, we typically don't do. whether it's letting our leaders know what roles we want to do next and what experiences we think we need to have to prepare us for those roles, or what kind of mentoring or training we need, to how we like to be recognized, to I think there's a pay gap of about 82 cents to $1, and I would like my pay to be adjusted corresponding to the work and the value that I'm adding to the organization, right? So it's advocating for yourself and knowing that, it used to be, well, when I started, it's like you put your head down and do good work and great things will happen. And you find out that you have to advocate. You have to let people know that you're doing those great things. So learning how to do that is important, but being mindful that you need to do it is most important.
Yeah, that's great. And kind of getting into that 82 cents to the dollar and digging into that, what are the best steps to advocate for yourself as it pertains to asking for a raise?
Well, I'll throw some thoughts out there, and Mitzi, I know you have a lot of thoughts on the subject. I mean, so it starts from the awareness, right, of how important it is to do this. One of the tips that one of our other sisters often uses is, don't just compare notes with the other women in your life, because you're going to get the same sphere of reference, but talk to the men in your life about what their salary ranges are, things like that. The second thing I would say is to prepare yourself for some pushback, because, and I know myself, but also people I mentor, they try to have that conversation about what they think they're worth, and they get the pushback. And you have to be ready for it, because it's not expected, and it's not as easy for women to stand up for what they think they're worth. It's very important, and bringing in allies, men, women, but just like having sounding boards where you can say, hey, help me, listen to my pitch and tell me how it sounds, because you should always be going for it.
Yeah, the build I would have on that too, specifically as it relates to raise, is know what your worth is, know what your value is. And that's, benchmarking with colleagues to the degree that it may be appropriate in your company. But also, you see job postings at other places for the work that you do, for the content that you deliver. What are other people in other industries getting paid, and like industries getting paid? I always encourage folks to be current with your resume and have exploratory interviews so you know your value.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Sorry about that.
Before we go into the recognition part of that, I just want to clarify and kind of ask. So there's a taboo around asking about money to each other, to the community, to your employer. So to be clear, it sounds like, yes, we should be talking about money. Why is it important for women to talk about money?
Knowledge is power. So the more you know, the better prepared you are to have those conversations. And I know sometimes you don't want to talk about it inside your organization, but that's why there's a lot of studies that are done, market research that you can do outside the organization. But knowledge is power. And so you want to be aware of, what the ranges are, for sure, right? Just like you decide, some people say, I'm looking at a number of different fields to go into. I want to know what the salary range is within a field. Well, it's important to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like one of the last taboos, right? Talking about money and how much money people make and things like that. But as Missy says, knowledge is power. And if you're trying to access, you're trying to move up, you're trying to access the power structure, you have to look at the money. You have to follow the money. And actually, just as an analogy, when we were at PepsiCo, marketing and sales, some of our best advocates were in the finance department. And it's a tip that we often give to women who are trying to understand, how to move up in an organization, is actually see how money flows in your job. Like, how are decisions made about money, and who, how does the company make money? Like, knowing that puts you in a much more powerful position. And so then just translate that to yourself. Like, you want to navigate the world with all the information you can about your personal finances, and sometimes it's helpful to think it's not just for yourself, because it goes back to the self-promotion thing. Like, it's hard when you're trying to, like, it feels like you're tooting your own horn. People don't like that, especially women. But if you think about how it helps your family or your team, that's where you get a lot more confidence and courage to have those hard conversations, I think.
Yeah. Love that. So kind of moving on to maybe a less monetary version of self-advocacy, but what about recognition? How would you go about kind of having a conversation about not getting proper recognition for something?
This is another very hot topic from our book, and one of the chapters we love talking about that simplifies it, but goes there. We call it Great Idea, Greg. And it's referring to how in a meeting, women often get their ideas taken and not get credit for them. But it goes to the bigger point of being heard, having your ideas heard and valued. And it's actually one of the top 3 reasons why women disengage in the workplace, is because they feel like they're not being heard and their ideas are not valued. So it matters a lot. And then, there's obviously a lot of tools you can bring into your life to make sure that you get heard. There was one that I think we refer to in the book that was credited to the Obama administration, White House, and the women that felt like they were often having their ideas stolen. And so they called it amplification. Like, they would be listening for women to put an idea into the room, and then another woman would repeat it or amplify it and make sure that credit was given where it was due.
I think the other place it comes into play too is, as a leader, as a boss, as a manager, knowing what each of your direct reports, if you will, knowing how they like to be recognized is really important. So you can recognize them in a way that works for them, as a way to motivate them. Also, if it's you, looking around to see how are people recognized in the organization for great work. And when you do great work, are you being recognized that way? Mm-hmm. You want to make sure that your work is being acknowledged, and you have a feel for what's being valued in the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to dig into that just a little bit. So there's a buzzword, mansplaining. We hear it all the time. And sometimes it comes into play in that situation, right? Where you might have a great idea, and then a male might repeat it back as his idea. And whether he knows he's doing it or not, how would you handle that situation when you're you're sitting there and you're like, how do I say that's what I just said? How would you handle that?
Thank you so much for building on my ideal, Greg. I'm glad you like that. And here's another take on that. Would be one way to deal with it.
Yeah.
Right. Just head on. If it's you. Now, Angelique could also say, thank you, Sam, for building on Mitzi's idea. Mm. Here's another point I would add.
Yeah. That community piece.
And that's where allyship comes in, right?
And it's so important. Like, anyone in the room can be that ally who's paying attention to how ideas are raised and how credit is being given. And you don't have to be the leader in the room to be the hero of that point. We also say there's acting in the moment, and then there's acting later, or there's acting never. And our whole hope is that there's a lot less never, and at least more later, if now, not now. That was funny how it came out. But what I'm trying to say is, Mitzi gave some really good examples of what you say in the moment. Like, you give credit, hey, that was a great build on my idea, or that was a great build on Mitzi's idea. We also have heard many stories where you'll walk out of the room and a man will say to you, I know that was your idea. That was a great idea. And it's like, hey, could you say it in the room the next time? So that's the debrief after the meeting. Or if you're going into a meeting where that often happens, and this was actually, I've been in a couple workplaces where it was common practice, you would go into the meeting prepared with your allies, like, we're going to be listening. We're like, there's a particular person who always does whatever, we're going to be ready. and you feel, you're bringing your band with you.
That's great. That's great. Before we kind of move on to the next set of questions, is there anything else that either of you would like to add about important discussions women might find themselves having or wanting to have in the workplace?
I would say one big discussion that I hope all women are having is with their leaders and letting them know what they would want to happen with their career, and having honest conversation about, are we aligned or not? And if we're not aligned, what's the conversation that we need to have? What specifically do we need to talk about? What specifically do I need to do to meet your expectations or exceed your expectations so I can be pursuing this career opportunity that I want? And then what is it going to take to get there, right? The developmental piece, and how can you support me? I think it's really important for female leaders to make sure that their leaders know what it is that they want.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Angelique?
Yeah, I'll add to that, because you've heard the saying that people join an organization but leave a manager. Like if your direct manager is someone that you can't have a good conversation with, like that conversation that Mitzi just described, which is so important. One of the things I am thinking about a lot is, how do you find someone else in the organization that you can go to? How do you sort of widen your net? And this comes up often in the context of mentors or sponsors, but looking beyond your direct manager, when you are looking for people who can advise you or people who can speak for you.
That's great. That's great. So kind of moving forward into some barriers that might get in the way of that. What are those barriers as it is, for women to engage in self-advocacy and promotion? I kind of want to start with stereotypes. What might exist either at work or in society that women are battling?
Well, gee, there's there's a whole category of things that is the stereotypes that are on both sides of a narrow balance beam for women. There's a lot of lazy language around she's not a great fit, or she should smile more, those kinds of proclamations. But it often comes down to, you can't be too aggressive and you can't be too meek. You can't be too ambitious and you can't be too soft. And so that narrow balance beam of acceptable behavior. In fact, the Band of Sisters laughs because the title of our book is called "You Should Smile More," which was said to one of the women in her performance review. And we could literally take the six of us and say, half of us were told to smile more, half of us were told to smile less, And so, that's a classic stereotype that you're, as a woman, fighting that likability trap, and that, discord between competence and confidence.
And there's the others that are more, this is a type of role she may want or she may not want. She may want to relocate, she may not want to relocate, but she never gets asked because everybody makes assumptions, right? Mm-hmm. So that comes into play quite a bit as well. It's a big watch out.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I also want to move on to learned behaviors. So we've mentioned that, it's not always men there that are at fault, that women kind of play into it as well, just based on what has always been. I think in your book, you mentioned like the note taker, like who's always the note taker, and how women often volunteer to do that because that's a learned behavior. So I kind of want to go over that, talk a little bit about learned behaviors and how both men and women can snap themselves out of that.
Yeah, there's several aspects in the book that talk about how women take on too much of the office housework, or taking the notes, or planning the events, but also being asked to lead the DEI committees and the extra offsite meetings and the United Way campaign or whatever. And often women want to do these things because they're very community minded and they know that these things have a good impact on the workplace, but they probably aren't fully calculating the cost of taking away from the promotable work and focusing on non-promotable work. And sometimes they just aren't doing that calculation. Sometimes they are, but they don't know how to say no, and they don't want to appear unhelpful. So, we have several tips and tricks that we talk about, but just for a few of them, there's the very direct, which is no is a complete sentence. But not many people want to be that blunt. I think the kind no is also very effective, which is here are all the things that are on my plate right now. Which of these top priorities should I be taking off to make room for this? Or, I will do this time, but how about we rotate next time to Joe or Mark, or, and hopefully highlight that it shouldn't always be the women doing it.
Yeah.
Mitzi, you got good ones.
No, I always say take charge on that, to say, okay, if this needs to be done, this person will do it in January, February, March, April. You kind of just take charge, but you make sure everybody has a role and things get evenly spread out. So you kind of share the opportunity.
Absolutely. Setting a boundary.
I heard one story, actually, just if I could add it to this. It was a very senior woman at a agency, and her CEO asked her to start a women's group, like a women's ERG network. And she was worried about this because she's like, "Ooh, this is the non-promotable work, and I don't think I want to do that." But she said, "Let me think about it." And she came back to him and she said, "Okay, here's what I propose. I'm going to create this women's group, and our goals are going to be to tackle one of the top business priorities of the company." So she was basically taking the opportunity and turning it into something that connects to the work, which I thought was a very smart way of turning it around.
Absolutely. Mitzi, anything you wanted to add to that before we move on?
No, I think we covered that one pretty good.
Great. Sort of on that topic, what kind of negative self-talk have you heard from women? And in a perfect world, how would that change? What would you like to see that talk look like?
So I'll take that one. I think a lot of what I've seen, particularly in coaching at VP, senior VP level, because there are so few, a lot more than we've had in the past, but still few, relatively speaking. And certainly when you look at the number of CEOs, confidence is a big piece. And so negative self-talk, or the story people are telling themselves, often tends to be, what if something doesn't go right? And so being mindful, my mom used to say, your attitude determines your altitude. And I think that is so true. And when you catch yourself thinking, oh, I can't do this, or this is not going to go well, I'd say flip the switch and imagine and think about, when this is awesome, how are you going to feel? Or how better is the situation going to be because you've impacted? So I think the big watch out is saying the right things to yourself is really important. Really important.
Yeah, one of the self-talks that I think of from my history is, I remember saying to myself, I'm just going to keep my head down and do good work. I remember saying that to myself. And it wasn't until I said it out loud to a male colleague. I said, I'm not trying to I'm just putting my head down and doing good work. He was like, that's not how it works. And he was like, you have got to make sure your work is visible, and don't think of it as tooting your own horn. Like, think of it as making sure that your work has as much impact as it can. And it's not just for the work you've done, but the work you're going to do. Like, this is important for you, for your development, but also for your team. And it was actually the team that made it easier for me to think, oh yes, I have to make sure my team is seen. And so that felt better. But definitely don't just keep your head down.
Yeah. And kind of digging into that a little, I want to ask you both, at what point did that break? Like, at what point did you both go from, I'm going to keep my head down and do good work, to I need to be heard? Or is that something you were brought up with and encouraged with from the beginning? So whoever wants to begin with that.
So I would say from early in my career, I was keep your head down, do great work. But I was also understood that I had to work twice as hard. because the microscope was on me as an African-American female, and I felt that throughout. And so from the beginning, it was this focus on do your work, do your work, do your work. But I, like Angelique, had someone early on say, well, people need to know what you're doing, and you need to talk about it in their team meetings, and you need to make your boss aware of it. And let's face it, particularly now, everybody's busy. And so they might not be checking up to see the results of your work, or they may not know what's going on everywhere. And so it's important to share what you're doing, so that people see that here's the objectives, here's the results that's being delivered in service of the organization. So really, really important in that regard.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely remember, coming from high school and college and into the workplace, it was so easy to be successful if you just put your head down and got your work done. And almost the educational system is built to support that. And we've studied in our own primary research and the research we read that girls and women graduate thinking that the workplace is going to be like it was in school, and that credit will be given to their work, and they just need to get it done. And I found that in the junior years, that can work, especially if you have a good manager. They're doing the things that are needed to propel you forward. But it's once you start getting to those senior levels, that it doesn't work that way anymore. And so for me, it was an epiphany quite late in my career. And we talk that the six of us went through the gauntlet and we made it to the C-suite, and yet we still had enough content to write this book. So it's we hope that earlier awareness will lead to earlier action for more people, and that they won't have the latent career epiphanies that we did.
Yeah. So I want to build on that a little bit, Amanda, and from two perspectives. One, because I was in sales, so it was a little bit more visible in terms of the results and how people have more visibility to your results. But one of the other things I'll point out, particularly from an executive coach perspective, organizations are built on relationships. And I felt like my male counterparts were more effective building relationships because they took the time and invested in that, while I was keeping my head down doing good work. And so I would see people over in the hallway at the water cooler talking. I'm like, man, they are wasting time. Only to find out that they met a whole lot of people and understood what they were doing, so that when they needed help on a project, they could call somebody in 5 minutes, and I'd be working through the weekend, trying to figure it out myself, right? Once I made that connection, game over, right? Because it is about building networks, building relationships, understanding how things work and who works them, right? And so I tell my clients, networking is part of the work. So make sure you're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So taking it from a boys club to an everyone's club, maybe, how would you suggest that a woman, if that's the culture in the workplace, how would you suggest that woman kind of build that confidence to say, we're going to change this into an everyone club? What would you suggest there?
So we talked about this a lot. This early in our PepsiCo days, this would manifest itself as the Monday morning meeting, where you'd come in and the first 10 minutes was about the football game. And if you didn't know sports or didn't like football, you were just kind of like sitting on the outside. So we're like, well, what did you do? So we had a bunch of scenarios. So one person would say, those commercials were fantastic, right? You change it to something that was relevant for you. Or did anyone go to the theater, or did anyone see a specific show on TV? It's like, how do you pivot to a topic that's not just a male dominated or exclusive for the group that's there? How do you have variety in the conversation? Is one way to address it.
Great.
And this is such a big and important topic, because there's the socializing that happens within the company forums, like things that the company might organize around employees that can be male oriented and need to be broader. But there's this whole world of like informal networking that happens outside of the workplace. So the company doesn't have any control over it. So the woman is much more responsible or accountable for thinking like, what am I missing out on? So and it's hard because if it's, pick up basketball and you don't play basketball, or, the senior leaders all have a running club and you don't do that, it's harder to break in. There was one story that I've told about a company where one of the C-suite leaders loved scotch, and he would invite men to go have a scotch with him after work. And he didn't invite the women, probably because he was being thoughtful and thinking that might be odd. But then these young men were getting the advantage of bending the ear of this senior leader, and the women were noticing it. So what do you do? So some of the strategies are around, actually, I'll summarize it as it's all figure out how to get in at least a little bit. Like, bring a friend and show up, or say, hey, I'd love to do that. And if you're not comfortable doing it alone, go, bring a friend. And I don't want to take Mitzi's 3 W's away, but Mitzi, we quote Mitzi all the time. If you're going to, at least make an appearance, walk in, walk around, and walk out. But at least you get the visibility. And I guess, again, the net of it is don't do nothing. It's important. And networking is part of the work, as Mitzi said.
Yeah. And I think this is where allies can come in too, because if you're in a situation where, you're a male and you're at a meeting and you find a couple of you say, hey, let's go grab drinks afterwards, and your female counterparts have not been invited, hey, let's make sure we invite everybody. Let's make sure we include everybody. It could be, you could be their boss, or you can be just witnesses. But how do you really spark inclusiveness from a group perspective?
Absolutely. And when we talk about allies and we talk about, men and women and how they're allies for one another, I want to dig into the question of being a working parent. So when we look at how we can look out for one another in the conversations being had about working parents, can you touch on the differences for men and women in that situation, and then how to have each other's back in those situations as well?
Well, I'll start out and prefacing with, I spent half my career as a single person and half of it as a working mom. So I kind of saw both sides. And I think when I didn't have a family, I remember feeling a little annoyed at the extra work that would be given to me because I was available, and the assumption was that I could, take on work that the people with families didn't. Like, I'm conscious of that as, also not fair. But then on the other side, when you have a family and you're trying to juggle, this is where flexibility is so important. And if you think about just the diversity of thought that you want to retain, you have to be able to, as a company, adjust to whatever the situation that your workers are in. And it might not just be childcare, by the way. It could be elder care. People have lives outside of work, and people will bring their best self to work if they feel that they're supported in what they have to do on the outside. So there's so many specific moments that you have to juggle in that, journey of life. But it might come down to just having the conversation, like having an explicit conversation about what you need in this moment. And if you're the leader, always being able to ask that, what do you need in this moment? How can I help you? Like, that's, when you're in the right place, when your leader is asking you that question.
Absolutely. Mitzi, anything to add to that?
I'm going to say I don't have a lot to add as a working parent because I don't have any children. But I would say, as a person who led people that had children or elder care to worry about, I try not to focus it on they have to go early to do this or early to do that. It's like they got the work done. So it's about the work and the camaraderie and the atmosphere. It's not, did somebody have to leave 15 minutes for this, that, or the other? It's not about that. Because there's a lot of people who stay at work all day and come early, stay late, but they don't produce a whole lot.
Yeah.
So watch out. So.
There was also a difference between men and women that we learned through writing the book that we often repeat, which is women tend to apologize a lot for having to leave early. So in Mitzi's example, like, I'm sorry, I have to leave and take my daughter to the doctor. Whereas men who are thankfully stepping up more into the, active parenting, but they don't apologize. I will be leaving at 4 o'clock to take my, and so that's another tip that we try to make sure women know about and practice.
Absolutely. I want to make sure we give time to questions, so I'm going to combine a few of our questions together. So if women don't self-promote, A, what might they lose out on? And B, how should they respectfully call out behavior that puts them down for self-promoting, either in the workplace or at home?
So if you don't self-promote, you run the risk of people not knowing what your results really are, and people not knowing what value or contributions you'd like to make in addition to what you're currently doing for the organization. So I think those are the big watch outs from my perspective. And it's, there's a big difference between mentors and sponsors, and oftentimes they get interchanged. But I think mentors are people who can help you navigate from kind of where you are. They kind of speak with you. They've been in your shoes, so to speak. Sponsors are people who advocate on your behalf when you're not in the room. And there's typically power associated with their position, right? And so when you're not effectively, actively, proactively promoting yourself, you run the risk of not attracting sponsorship, right? And sponsorship is important to get the right critical experiences to be ready for the next move, the right exposure to the leaders that are picking those that are going to go in the next roles, or even the right functional opportunities to increase your learning and development. So that would answer your first question. And your second part was about, what do you do when people are negatively talking about?
Yeah, how do you call out negative behavior? And it can be at home too, about, self-promoting or being your own advocate.
I can pick up on that if you want, and tie it into also language and framing that you can use to self-advocate, which is an acronym we call Situation Behavior Impact, SBI. And it's to say, what was the situation, what was the behavior you observed, and most importantly, what was the impact? This often comes up when women are given feedback on their style. But it also works for other situations as well. But when the language is vague, when the feedback is like, really, I should smile more. Situation behavior impact is a way to make sure that the person giving the feedback thinks about what they're communicating, but gives them a chance to explain in case there really is something there, and put it in more actionable terms. And the impact at the end of the day is the most important thing, is how is that impacting my results? And that's a conversation that allows you to self-advocate, because you're bringing it back to results, and you're asking for feedback that you can take real action with. And it's also putting you in a very good light, because you're not being defensive, and you're not ignoring the comment. You're actually looking for how to make it practical.
Absolutely. And that, I would imagine, serves as well if you have a right to be defensive, or if something really is that negative. By using that framework, we're allowing ourselves to kind of reflect that back to the person asking it. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's perfect. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the other key piece there is, you ask them, is that your intent? Right? So what is your intent? If your intent and your impact match, it's all good. But if it's not, that's where the real conversation starts. So help me understand. Help me understand how my behavior is not being accepted here, or what you would like to see different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to invite everyone to send in some questions as I ask my last question. So my last question is a little bit more high level, but I feel as if I talk to many women across the board in terms of age, demographic, who are not quite sure where they fit in the world yet, whether it's their career or personally. What is your advice for women trying to find their place in the world?
I get this a lot from an executive coaching perspective. A lot of people trying to figure out what's next. And I often ask them, what's the impact that you want to have on the world? And what is it that you're passionate about? And is there a way what's the intersection of those two? And is there work that you can do at the intersection of your passion and the impact that you want to have as a starting point?
That's great. Angelique?
Yeah, and I'd say it's sort of building on my earlier comment about don't keep your head down. It's literally like keep your head up and be open, because I think it's being open to what might come of different experiences that leads you to realize, oh, I love this. I want to do more of this. And I can think of so many times in my career where I was given an opportunity that I was like, I'm not sure about that. And I tried it and I was like, this is amazing, And so I think that openness also will give you a chance to just try a lot of things and find and keep trying until you find something that you are just so excited to do. You wake up every day and you're like, I can't believe I get to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't be afraid of what's going to build your story, what may come to build that, and say yes.
Yeah, you create what you want, right? And so I used to say, because there's a lot of reorgs and organizations where I worked, it's like at any fork in the road, how do you have multiple career options? How do you position yourself so you've got multiple career options?
Yeah, absolutely. So I see we have one question. If anybody wants to send a question in as we answer this one, we have about 8 minutes to do questions here. So this question is, what is your advice for coping with intense emotions in the workplace? Oftentimes we don't want our emotions to define us at work, but they get the best of us at times. So what's your advice to dealing with that?
I feel like anything I would say, Mitzi is going to give the real executive coaching answer to it. But I'll start with the obvious double standard, which is women are often considered, told they're being too emotional, where men get away with anger and strong emotions like that, which are somehow more acceptable in the workplace. And why should they be? But this is definitely something that I've had to think about many times in my career, when you don't want to appear to be weak, because that's the math people are doing in their head. Oh, emotional means weak. And so if you're like me and prone to, being very passionate about your work and caring so much that it looks emotional, part of it is making sure that you can always explain it as passion, like I care a lot about this. And so, this is why I'm leaning in this way, and anticipate situations where that might happen and be prepared, to take a breath, to step out if you need to, and I hate that it's on oneself to manage that. But yeah, we've got a ways to go with acceptable range of emotions in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a good executive coach answer, Angela.
Was it?
It was. I'd somewhat say it depends on the situation, and where you are and the statement you want to make, so to speak. But broadly, I think to me, it's about trying to respond versus react. And a lot of times what comes out first is our emotion. And sometimes it's uncontrollable. So you just have to go with it, right? But if you have the opportunity to take a breath and pause and then craft a response that's what I would often recommend. If you can't do that, then just be you. Because I think it's important, some people that are just stoic all the time, people need to know people need to know. It's a part of good communication if people know how you feel about things. So we often talk about it's all about the facts. Well, it's not just about the facts. It's about the facts. It's about how people feel and why a topic is important to somebody. I saw the facts will tell you what you should do, but the feelings and values tell you what people are going to do. Right? So all that comes into play. And to Angelique's point, because there's such a small range of emotion, we need to broaden that range. And emotion does not define us. There's the whole angry Black woman syndrome. For a moment, someone might be angry or disappointed or whatever. It doesn't define them. Yeah. It's what happened in the moment. And so really for the other folks seeking to understand what's driving, what's behind that emotion is really when you're going to find connection and ability to build trust in a relationship that's going to make collaboration and trust in the workplace all that much better. So that's a long answer to your question.
That's a real executive coach answer.
No, that's great. And I just one more follow-up on that. Would you say that that empathy or that ability to see those intersections, Mitzi, as you mentioned, that angry Black woman, perspective, would you say that's a woman's superpower at the executive level, is to be able to have empathy and see people at those intersections?
I think it's everybody's superpower to be able to see that. And I think that's really important for people who want to be seen and want to belong, feel part of something. Right? That's the spirit of community that you're trying to create, particularly an inclusive community. Right? What's that saying? People won't do anything until they know that you care. Right? So.
Yeah. Angelique, anything you would like to add to that before we wrap up?
Well, I would just emphasize that word community again. I think that if there is a superpower, my comment on the superpower aspect is the priority of community that women tend to bring to their work. And I've seen it in several studies and workplaces. It's definitely something that when harnessed makes a workplace that much stronger, or makes whatever the initiative that much stronger. And I think we tend to have the prioritization on that makes it move forward.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you both. I'm going to do a quick closing, but thank you both so very much. We're going to do a plug for the book in just a second, but as a pre-plug to plug, please buy the book. It's incredible. It looks like this. I brought it so I can show you. Here's the cover. This is what it looks like. We'll turn it to you just briefly to share where you can get it, or where they should get it. So I'll turn that back over to you for a second.
Well, the easiest place is if you go to our website, thebandofsisters.com. You can follow us, join our newsletter, find the book, follow us on LinkedIn, all from our website. But the book is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and any place where you might find a book. And the audiobook is coming out in December.
Ooh, are you all narrating the book?
We wanted to, but 6 people is kind of complicated.
That does seem. If we're okay, if we extend by just a couple minutes, we did get another question, if it's okay to go for that. This came in, what's your advice for having a female manager that may be used to accepting the boys club mentally over, making sure that the female team is taken care of and is getting credit for their work? How can her team gain visibility as individuals sitting in that boys club?
Well, we sometimes get the question about what about the women that don't help other women? And it's unfortunate that happens, but there's, as many women that do that as men. And this is where allyship matters a lot, is find your allies. And if your direct manager is not the one giving you visibility, like maybe there's another leader in a function, a complementary function that could be your advocate. And definitely look beyond your direct manager. But I'd also say, and I don't know if Mitzi would agree with this, but like I would make it explicit, like bring it up, like, hey, leader, we'd like to make sure that our work is visible, and we're having trouble, getting our breaking into the boys club. Like, how can you help us, make the explicit ask?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Giving the manager the feedback that, hey, I don't think you're sharing enough, and here's how it's impacting us. I also think for the people that report to her, having conversations about how might we promote ourselves and get our boss to promote us more. Maybe you have to like write what you want her to send out so that it gets sent out. The other thing is, again, building relationship not just with your boss, but those that are peers with your boss. So they might be in different functions, they might be in the same function, but sharing your work, talking amongst her peers will be important too, and her boss even. And you can run into them in the elevator, the water cooler, the United Way meeting ends, you walk down the hall and start sharing. There's all kinds of ways to make that happen.
Excellent. Thank you so much for fielding that last question. Before we wrap up here, as a plug for Habitat for Humanity, as I mentioned earlier, Women Build is our signature event, and it is just a couple of weeks away. 300 women will come together to raise walls, raise money, and raise awareness. And it's about empowering women to build a house, as well as shedding a light on these inequities that we've been talking about today, and as it pertains to home ownership. So as a note of how this relates back to our mission, achieving housing stability is far more difficult for women to realize than men in similar situations, and just wanted to kind of share a couple of reasons why. Number one, sort of as we discussed, men earn more on average than women, resulting in access to higher credit and better loans. So this is an institutional issue as well. Unequal caregiving responsibilities, as we also mentioned today, limit a woman's ability to dedicate the necessary time to obtaining and maintaining that employment. And single women are denied mortgages at a higher rate than single men, despite the fact that women are more reliable at paying back mortgages. So again, an institutional issue. So our Women Build fundraising goal this year is $175,000. We would not be a nonprofit if we did not encourage to donate, as those donations will help women and their families achieve their dream of home ownership. So you can do that by clicking the Women Build link on our website. You can go to DuPageHabitat.org, click Women Build, and you'll find all the information there. But as a closing, thank you also very much for joining. And thank you, Angelique and Mitzi, for your time. I encourage everyone to go forth and lift as you climb. So thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you. Thanks, Amanda.